Today's daf is Menachos daf Ayin Hey, and we are at the Mishnah on the bottom of daf Ayin Dalid Amid Beis, moving along with some of the technicalities of how certain menachos were prepared. So the Mishnah, Kol menachos hanasos bekli, all menachos that were prepared in a kli shares. We'll see in the Gemara what that means. To unos shloisha matanoy shemen, required 3 servings of oil. Yitzika, one was to be mekayim the mitzvah of Yitzika. Ubelila, another was to be mekayim the mitzvah of Belila. Umatan shemen bekli kaidem lasiyasa. And additionally, right at the beginning, before the Yitzika and before the Belila was done, there was oil that was put into the kli shares. So the Mishnah is saying that we know that most menachos required shemen. How exactly was the oil put into the mincha? Says the Mishnah, the menachos that were nasais bekli were done in 3 servings. Shloisha matanos. Yitzika, Belila, Umatan Shemen Bekli, Koidem Lasiyasam. And Rashi says that the Mishnah is really explaining it backwards. The first thing that happened was there was oil poured into a klisharis. After the oil was poured into a klisharis, they put silas. Then they poured more oil, and when the second serving of oil was put into the klisharis, they were mekayim the mitzvah of Belila, which literally means they mished the silas together with the shemen. After they did the Belila, there was a 3rd serving of oil that was put in. That was the mitzvah of Yitzika. This is all learned from Sukkim. But again, when we talk about oil being put into the carbon mincha, it was put into 3 phases. We already know this because we're learning Menachos already for almost 75 dafin. But this is the source. It comes from this Mishnah right here. Ayin Daled Amid Beis. The Mishnah continues and says, "Chalois boilul on divrei Rebbe. The Chachamim moimrim soilas." So one of the minachos that were brought were the minchas ma'afe. The minchas Mafe. Additionally, you had the minchas machvas and the minchas marcheshes, which were all going to be baked before the part of the mincha that was supposed to go on the mizbeach was going to be put on the mizbeach. So ordinarily, when you visualize in your mind the carbon mincha, so you think of silas and shemen, you do the kmitza, you put the kaimitz on the mizbeach, and then you prepare the shirayim so that the kayanim can eat the shirayim mincha, as we spoke about it yesterday's. But the truth is that there were many menachos that were prepared first. Afterwards, the kmitza was done. So how do you do kmitza on a challah? How do you do kmitza on a matzah? So there was a mitzvah called pesisa. You'll see that at the latter part of the daf. They were poises the challah. They were poises the mincha. And then, after the pesisa, after they turned it into crumbs, or we'll see different shitas in the Tanam, then they were able to go ahead and do the kmitza again. The question is, these challahs, when exactly was the belila done? According to Rabbi, the belila was done in the state of challah. So just like the kmitza was done after it was already a challah, so too the belila was done after it was already a challah. The Chachamim say soilas. That no, even those menachos, the belila was done while it was in a state of soilas. Hachalois to unois belila, urikikim mishicha. Within the world of Minchas Mafei Taner, there were 2 types of menachos. There was the Minchas Mafei Taner that was chalos, and there was the Minchas Mafei Taner that were rikikin. Pashut, the difference between chalos and rikikin is challah is like a challah. Think of a bread or a pita or a challah that you eat on Shabbos. Rikikin were more like flatbreads, more like matzahs. So the chalos were belulois bashem, and they needed the mitzvah of belila, whereas the minchas mafei taner that wasn't in a state of challah, it was in a state of rikikin. Rather than having the mitzvah of belila, what there was instead was a mitzvah meshicha. Keitzad moishchan. How exactly was the meshicha done? Kimin ki. They poured a little bit of oil on it, like the shape of a key. We'll see what that means in the Gemara. And whatever was left over from the shemen was eaten by the kohanim. Regardless, the Mishnah said that when we talk about putting shemen in a carbon mincha, so it wasn't done in 1 serving, but rather was done in 3 servings. But the Mishnah prefaced it by saying, Kol menachos hanasos bikli tunay shalish mat noy shemen. It was only the menachos that were prepared in a keli. Says the Gemara, lemute mai. What is it coming? Lemute, meaning what's the mincha that wasn't prepared in a keli, that doesn't have this halacha of tu'unos shalosh matanos? Amar Papa said the lemute minchas mafi. It's coming to exclude the minchas mafi. The minchas mafi was prepared not in a kli like the machvas and the marcheshes, but rather was prepared in the oven. Obviously, the Tana, the Mishnah is of the opinion that this oven wasn't a kli sharis, being that it wasn't a kli sharis, so it has a different halacha. Over here, you don't have the halacha of 3 matanes. How many matanes do you have? So we're really going to have to wait until later in the daf to see this, but it's The Gemara is going to say it was 2 matanos. The one that it didn't have was yitzika. So ordinarily, you put shemen into the keli, then there was belila, then there was yitzika. That's only true for the menachos that were nasis bekli. But the mincha that wasn't nasis bekli, the mutei mai, the mutei minchas mafe. Why was it in a kli? Because it was in a tanner. And we're going that the tanner is not a kli sharis. It only had 2 matanos. It had the first and the second. What it didn't have was the third. It didn't have the mitzvah of yitzika. Tanu Rabbanon. The pasuk says v'minchas marcheshes korbanecha soiles b'Hashem etayas. So the pasuk is talking about the minchas marcheshes, and we learn from this pasuk malami chetuna matan shemen b'kli, that before you do anything, before you even put soiles into the kli, you first have to put shemen into the kli. Where do you see it in the pasuk? Because it says v'minchas marcheshes korbanecha soiles b'Hashem. You should put the soiles on top of the shemen. So you see, first you put the shemen, and only afterwards you put the soiles. Korbanecha. It says korbanecha regarding the minchas marcheshes. That's the pasuk that we just read. It also says korbanecha regarding the minchas machvas. It says ve'im mincha ala machavas korbanecha. We learn from there ligzeir shavas. We have ligzeir shavas between the minchas machvas and the minchas marcheshes. Ma'kam by the minchas marcheshes matan shemen bekli, as we just said, because it says soiles ba shemen teyasa, that the soiles goes on top of the shemen afla halon. So too regarding the minchas machvas matan shemen bekli. So even though that pasuk of soiles ba shemen teyasa you only have by the minchas marcheshes, you don't have it by the minchas machavas, stating that the halacha is going to be true by the minchas machavas as well. How do I know that? From Gzeir Shavah, because it says korbanecha by the minchas marcheshes, but it also says korbanecha by the minchas machavas. Says the Gemara, once you have the Gzeir Shavah, you can learn the halacha of marcheshes from machavas as well. How so? Malahalam by the minchas machavas, you have yitziku belila, because there the pasuk says mefurish Yitzika Belila. It only says it by the Minchas Machvas, Afkan, so by the Marcheshes, Yitzika Belila. So the bottom line is, the Mishnah said, Kol ha-Menachos ha-Nasas Bekli tu'noi sholish matonis, and included in matonis ha-Nasas Bekli are the Minchas Machvas and the Minchas Marcheshes. Really, if you go through your Mava Sedra, Shnai Mikra Becha Targum, the Minchas Machvas, you're not going to see sholish matonis. And if you go through the Minchas Marcheshes, you're also not going to see sholish matonis. You're going to see 1 here, you're going to see 2 there, but what you're also going to see is the same word, Karbanecha, in both parashiyos, Ligzeir Shava, to teach me that the 1 here applies there and the 2 there apply here. Bottom line is, both parashiyos are going to have all 3 ma'atonis. So we had a machlekes in the Mishnah regarding the minchas machvas, the minchas marcheshes, and the minchas mafe, all of which were baked or fried before you did the kmitza, before it was put on the mizbech. There's a mitzvah of belila. The question is, when exactly was the mitzvah of belila done? Was it done before it was baked, or was it done after it was baked? So the Mishnah said, "Chala is boiling divi Rebbe." Rebbe says the belila was done after it was already chala. The Chachamim say this. The Chachamim say no, the belila was done while it was still in a state of silas. Tanu Rabbanon. The pasuk says, "Soiles belula bashem," and we learn from there, "Malamich and Avlela silas." You see clearly that the belila is supposed to be when it's in a state of silas. This pasuk is referring to the minchas machvas, which was later going to be fried, and you see clearly that the minchas machvas is belila was done while it was in a state of silas. Rebbe says chala is boilim. No, it was done in a state of chala shenemar, because the pasuk says regarding the minchas mafei tanar chalois belulois bashamen. So on the one hand it says soilas belula bashamen regarding the minchas machvas, but it says chalos belulas bashamen regarding the minchas mafei. The chachamim darshan soilas belula bashamen. Rebbe darshan chalos belulas bashamen. Amrullah, it's a chacham told Rebbe about lachmei toida never chalos. It says by the lachmei toida the same lashon chalos, and then later it says belulois bashamen, which according to you Rebbe would seem to suggest that the belila happened after it was already a state of chala. But the chachamim told Rebbe, you and I can both agree objectively that that it's not possible to do the belila with the lachmi toida while it was in a state of chal. Meaning, the Chachamim told Rebbe that even though we're arguing regarding the minchas machvas and the minchas marcheshes and the minchas mafitan, whether the belila was done while it was stoiles or it was done after it was already prepared, after it was already chalas. But regarding the lachmi toida, I think you and I could agree, tell the Chachamim to Rebbe that there's no shayla, even though it says chalas belules bashemen. So what does that mean? The chalas belules bashemen in and of itself doesn't mean anything, because if it means something by the mafe, then it has to mean something by the lachmei toida, and there's no way they did the belila by the lachmei toida after it was already chalas. Maybe they did, so the Gemara is going to ask that kasha soon. But either way, says the Gemara, so Ketzad Oisa, so the Chachamim basically came and they issued their final statement, and they said, I'm going to tell you exactly how the mincha was prepared, whether it was a machvas, marcheshes, or a mafi. No, you send Shem, the first thing is to put Shem in the kli. That's before anything. V'nois, and then you put the soilus on top of the shemen. V'nois and shemen alev boilah, and then while it's still in a state of soilus, you didn't bake it yet, you put shemen in it since zweiten mu and this time you do the belila. Ve'lasha, now you start preparing the bread. You knead it, ve'oifa, and you either bake it or you fry it. Upaisisa, then you're going to do the pesisa, second part of the daf. Then you're going to break it up again. Ve'noisen oleo shemen, and you're going to put shemen again. This time for the yitzika. Ve'kaimitz, you're going to do the kamitz, and you're going to put the kaimitz on the mizbeach, etc., etc. So according to Chamim, you do the belila while it's in a state of size. Rabbi Yaiman, how's it going to go down according to Rabbi? Chalis bailam, shenema chalis b'lis b'shem keitzadoisa. Nice shemen b'kli. First you're going to put shemen in the keli. Kaidem lasiyasa. V'nois, and then you put the soils on top of that. Now, before the belila, the lasha you knead it. V'oifa you bake it. Upaisisa you do the psisa. V'nois and aleh shemen to the second time. Uvailala again you do the belila. V'chayze v'nois and aleh shemen, and then you put shemen again. V'kaimetz, and you do the kmitza. So one thing is clear that everybody agrees, Rabbi and the Chachamim, that the yitzika was done after it was already in the state of challah. The question is regarding the belila. So we have a machlokes Rabbi and the Chachamim where the challah is boiled or soilus boiled. Whether the belila was done before it was baked or fried, or the belila was done after it was baked or fried. But as it relates to the yitzika, the third serving, that for sure was done after it was already baked. Now, the Chachamim had a checkmate raya to Rabbi. The Chachamim told Rabbi that I know that my diak is right. Again, the Chachamim's diak was, it says Soilas Blul Bashemen regarding the Minchas Machvas. Rabbi's diak was that it says Chalis Blulus Bashemen regarding the Minchas Mafei Taner. So, maybe the Chachamim are right, maybe Rabbi's right. But Chachamim told Rabbi, I'll prove to you I'm right. Because by the Lachmei Toida it also says Chalis Blulus Bashemen, and therefore sure doesn't mean that the believer was done after it was in a state of Chala. Why not? And the Chachamim said, because it's not possible. Must be Chalis Blulus Bashemen is not a diak. What then is the right diuk in the parsha of the Menachos? It's Silas Bluis Bashem. Says the Gemara, you have to come later Rabbanon Mahi. Why is it not possible? If they're debating it regarding the Machvas, the Marcheshes, and the Mafe, why can't that be the pshat regarding Lachmei Toida as well? Amar Shul Rabbi Yitzchak, Revius, Shemen, Heich Mischalekes, the Kamachalis. Because if you take the amount of oil that was put into the carbon toida, and the amount of breads that made up the lachmei toida, proportionally it would be impossible to do a belila, to properly mix the oil into all the breads that made up the challah. And that's based on the fact that an ordinary mincha was made up of 10 breads. So don't think of one bread, think of 10 breads. The lachmei toida, however, had 40 breads. So tainin, the chachamim, that the amount of oil to mix into 10 breads, that's possible whether the breads are in a state of soilus or whether they were actually baked already. But if you want to mix it into 40 breads, bishleim if it's soilus. So while it's soilus, it's porous. It's much easier to make this taruvas. But once you have the 40 breads, you're going to take the amount of oil, this revius, shemen, and you're going to pour it into the 40 chal. It's not possible. Must be that it was done in the state of soilus. So if we're dealing with an ordinary mincha, machvas, marcheshes, mafei taner, I don't know, I could hear it this way, I could hear it that way. From the Mitzias both ways work, from the Psukim both ways work. It's a shayla. But Tainul Chacham, I have an objective proof that the way to darshan the Psukim is Soilas Bluis Bashem and not Chalis Bluis Bashem. Because by the Lachmei Toida b'Mitzias, it was only possible Soilas. It wasn't possible Chalis. That's what the Chachamim went when they told Rebbe that Lachmei Toida Toichiach. Zok the Gemara. Amr Reb Shmuel Reb Yitzchak. Right, the Gemara explains what we just said. Revi Shemeni Heichmes Chalekes v'Kamat Chas. Chalis to Uno is Belila. Urikikin meshicha. So the Minchas Mafei Taner came in two forms. According to Reb Shimon, it came in three forms. Right? The Torah says very clearly that if somebody wants to bring a Minchas Mafei Taner, so this is a mincha that's going to be baked in a Taner, we had earlier in the Masechta, what if it was a different type of oven? Right? A Taner is a very specific type of oven. When you learn Perakira, so you get very involved in a Taner, and a Kira, and a Kupa. There's different types of ovens. But the Pasuk talks about a Mafei Taner, that this mincha was prepared in a Taner. And there was two ways you could prepare. You could prepare it in the state of chalos, you could prepare it in the state of rikika. And as mentioned earlier, pashib shat in chalos it's more of a challah. It has some height. It's like a pita. Rikikin would be more of a flatbread. Now the Torah, when it talks about the minchas mafe and describes these two types, the Torah says as follows: "V'chisakriv korban mincha mafe tanor, soiles chalois matzois belulois b'Hashem, urikike matzois b'shuchim Hashem." So if you're going to make it chalois, it should be belulois b'Hashem. If you're going to make it rikikin, then it should be mishuchim b'Hashem. That's the halacha of the Mishnah. Hachalois to unois belila, urikikin don't have a mitzvah of belila. Instead of a mitzvah of belila, you have a mishich. So the Mishnah started off and said there were 3 matanos of shemen that were put into a mincha. Whoa, the 3 matanos of shemen, you put shemen in the beginning, then there was belila, then there was yitzika. There was a mincha that didn't have belila at all. There was a mincha that in lieu of belila, they did Meshicha. It's based on a pasuk in the Torah. It's the Minchas Mafe, where it's not being brought in the form of Chala, it's being brought in the form of Rikikin. How do I know that? It's a pasuk. The Torah says Chala is Belulos Bashemen, Urikike Matzah is going to be instead Meshuchim Bashem. It's the word Tanu Rabbanon. Chala is Belulos, V'lei Rikikin Belulim. Only the Chala had this mitzvah Belila. But if the Mafe Tana was Rikikin, there was no mitzvah Belish. Yachal, I would have thought V'aloi Dinu. Ma Chala Shem Tunas Meshicha Tunas Belila. I would have thought Ma the Chalas that don't have a mitzvah Meshicha, because it says Meshicha by the Rikikin, still have a mitzvah belila. Rikikin should do Meshicha. Rikikin that do have a mitzvah Meshicha, ain't a din should do belila. So Tainas the Gemara, shouldn't you make a kal v'chaymer that the Rikikin should need belila? Madach the Rikikin have Meshicha. Certainly they should have belila, right? The Chalis don't have Meshicha and they have belila. So the Rikikin that have Meshicha, ordinarily a mincha doesn't have Meshicha, it has Belila. So you found one mincha in the Torah that has a new mitzvah, Meshicha, so Kal V'chaymer should have Belila. Talmud Leiber, no, Chalais Belulos, there's a diak, V'loi Rikikim Belulin. Rikikim Meshuchin, the Rikikin had Meshicha, V'loi Chalais Meshuchais. The minchas Mafe, if it was in the form of Chalais, didn't have Meshicha. I didn't know, I would have thought, Rikikin Shein Tuna Belila, Tuna Meshicha, Chalais Shetuna is Belila, Einoi Din, Shetuna is Meshicha. Madach, this type of minchas Mafe needs Belila, certainly it should need Meshicha, Talmud Levi, Rikikim Meshuchim, V'loi Chalais Meshuchas. My Talmud, what's this diak? Right, the Gemara is saying, oh, you have a diak. Dafka, this is Meshicha, Dafka, this is Belila. What's the diak? My Talmud, Amar Rava, like the Shtamit, the Lichte Chalais Meshuchas, Rikikim Bechul. Because there's a few times in the Torah where the Torah talks about the two types of Minchas Mafe, the Chalais and the Rikikin, and every time the Torah introduces it, the Torah says the Chalais should be Belulos Bashemen, and their kikim should be Meshuchim Bashemen. And from the fact that the Torah always brings it that way, that's a raya that you can't even make kal v'chaymers, and you can't say that yochsha yochav halidinu ma this ma that. The fact that the Torah always presents it in this way, it's for that reason that we know that that's the way it's supposed to be. So again, so we have a big chiddush over here. We have a mincha that needed shemen but didn't have the mitzvah of belila. What was that? It was the minchas mafei taner when you're bringing it in a state of rikikin. Instead of having a mitzvah belila, there was a mitzvah meshicha. What's meshicha? Very simple. You smear oil on top of the mincha, as opposed to belula where it gets mamish tzamish. Says the Mishnah said, "Ketzan moishcha." How was the meshicha done? Kemin ki. It was done in the tzura of a ki. Vashar. What was left over was nechal l'koyhana. My kemin ki. What does that mean? Rav Kahana said kemin ki yavani. Ki is actually a letter in the Greek alphabet. So if you want to know exactly what it's supposed to look like, so it's the letter ki. L'maisa, the Rishonim aren't exactly sure what that letter is. Some say it's a U. Take a look at Rashi in the Mishnah. Taisus right here in the Ayin Hey and Aleph. Maybe it's a V. Some say it's an X. Regardless, it was done with the shape of this letter key. I saw Pasha, the Mefarshim, quote unquote, say that presumably the reason the Tanam used the letter key is because there probably was no letter in the Hebrew alphabet that properly described exactly how it should be done. Because if there was a letter of the Chav Beis Oisiyos Shenivru Bem Shemayim Va'aretz, then you would think that we would have taken one of the Hebrew letters. Why are we running to a Greek letter to explain the way the Heilige Mincha, the Minchas Ani, which is Kodesh Kodashim, was brought in the Beis Hamikdash? But the truth is, we've spoken outright in the past that there were very often times that Chazal, instead of using Lashon HaKodesh, they preferred not to use Lashon HaKodesh. They used Shai Lashonis. So I got a tshuva from the Divrei Yoel. I think it's a raid by not so long ago with tshuva from the Maram Shik. But either way, that's what it was. It was Kamin Ki. So they didn't smear the entire minchas. It was very different than the chalis. The chalis that were beluis b'shemen, the shemen had to get eingezapt in all of the mincha. Over here, it was just it was like a little something that they put on top, something a little decorative. There was a little bit of, it was a U, a V, an X, but it wasn't the entire mincha that had the oil on top of it. Tanu Rabbanon, more halacha is regarding the minchas mafei taner. Mincha haba mechza chalois or mechza rikikin. What happens if somebody's bringing a minchas mafei taner and it's mechza chalois, mechza rikikin? Now, who holds you could do that? Rav Shimon. Because according to Chachamim, you have two choices with the Minchas Ma'afi Taner. Either Chales or a Kikir. Rav Shimon's Shita is that you could bring Mechza, Chales, Mechza, or Kikir. So we're going in Rav Shimon's world. That the Mincha was Mechza, Chales, or Mechza, or Kikir. Or at least it could be. That was the third option of how you bring the Ma'afi Taner. Maybe like Shemin Chaytzeh. So they brought it like Shemin. That was the shear of Shemin that you needed. And they divided it into half. Chetzi or Chales, V'chetzi or Kikir. V'chalo is Boila. With the Chalo, they did Bolila. That's what you're supposed to do. Or a Kikir, Moishch. That's what you're supposed to do. Umeshech has a rock al and what they did with the Mashiach was they did it on the entire mincha. And what they do with the rest of the shemen, machzira lechalos, they put it into the mixture with the chalos. So there's two chilukim l'chura, over here, with regards to the way the first sheet in this brisa presents the mitzvah of Mashiach versus the way we had it in the Mishnah. Number one, the Mishnah said that the Mashiach was done kamin ki, so we're not sure exactly what that is, but it's the ki yavanis, this Greek letter. Here the Mishnah says, u'mosheach es harokik al penei kulai. No, they did Mashiach on the entire mincha. Additionally, the Mishnah said, what do you do with the leftover oil? It's nechal kayanim. Over here, the brisa says, ashar shemen machzira lechalas. Rav Shimon ben Yehuda, Mishnah Rav Shimon, who said in the name of Rav Shimon, and he's the one. Rav Shimon is the Tana who holds that there's even such a concept. There's a mincha that's going to be mechza chalos, mechza rikikin. Moishchan kamin ki, ushar Hashem and nechal kayanim. Exactly what the Mishnah says. So this is not a masnisin delaker Rav Shimon. This is actually a masnisin that's Rav Shimon. Finally. So we had so much masnisin delaker Rav Shimon in Masechtas Menachos. Here you have a Mishnah that's mamash Rav Shimon shita. It's Rav Shimon in the brisa. That the Mashiach was not done on the entire Rakik, but rather it was done kamin ki. What about the leftovers? It was nachal tanya. Another brisa. Rakikin above b'fnei atzman. Maybe like shemen u'moishchan v'chayzer u'moishchan ad sheyichla kol shemen shabeloy. A third shita. So here we're talking about a regular rakikin above b'fnei atzman. Minchas mafi that's being brought rakikin, not mechza chalis mechza rakikin. It's rakikin above b'fnei atzman. You do meshicha al pnei kulay. Not kamin ki, but here's the chiddush. The chiddush is that you keep on doing it until there's no oil left. Rav Shimon, Reb Shimon, Moishchan kamin ki, Ushar Shem Nachal Kiyanim. This is Rav Shimon L'Shitasai, who is the Tana of our Mishnah. The Mishnah says, small Mishnah, don't miss it. Kol HaMenachos Hanasis Bekli to Unois Pesisas. Every single mincha that was prepared in a keli, such as the machvas and the marcheshes, so they need pesisa. After they were baked or fried, they would break it up. Zok the Gemara, Lamu'utei Mai. Kol ha-menachos ha-nasos bekli is coming to be memayit what? So in the previous Mishnah, when the Mishnah talked about kol ha-menachos ha-nasos bekli to unay shalish matnei shemen, you put shemen, and then you do belila, and then you do yitzika. Then the Mishnah said it was lemu'ute minchas mafei. Over here the Gemara is going to say something else. What's a lemu'ute? Amar papa lemu'ute shtei halechem v'lechem aponim. They're referred to throughout Masechtas Menachos as Menachos, and they are considered Menachos that were not nasos bekli, because they were baked in an oven. Again, the oven was chayil, and being that the oven was chayil, they're not considered Menachos and nasos bekli, and that's what the Mishnah is being memayit when it says only Menachos that are nasos bekli to unois pesisa. But the shtei alechem v'lechem aponim were not considered to be nasos bekli. Thus, they don't have the mitzvah of pesisa. Tanu Rabbanon, it says in the Torah, pasos oisa pitin. That's the pasuk that teaches me the mitzvah of pesis. Again, pasois oisa pitin v'yatzakta olev shemen minchahi, and the Gemara is going to darshan every syllable in this pasuk. Zok the Gemara, we learn from here for the fact that the Torah says mincha l'rabbi is kol menachos l'psisa. So not only the mincha that this pasuk is describing, which is the minchas machavas, but all menachos, even the minchas mafeh, all menachos have this halacha of pesisa. Yochel shani marba av shtei alechem lechem aponim. I would think to be marba even shtei alechem lechem aponim. Talmud loy mar oisa. No, it says pasois oisa. Oisa is a miyut. To tell me there's something that's excluded. So on the one hand, the word mincha is marba, not only the minchas machvas. Now, if I know machvas, I would know marcheshes as well. Why? Because we had on the top of the Yom the Gzeir Shava, Karbonecha, between the Machvas and the Marcheshes. That's why I know Sholish Matnei Shemen by the Machvas and the Marcheshes. So again, the Torah says Pasas Eisa. Let's just go through this clearly. Pasas Eisa Pita, the Torah says where? By the Minchas Machvas. If the Torah says it by the Minchas Machvas, I know it by the Minchas Marcheshes as well. Now the Torah says the word Mincha. That's the rabbis. What's it coming to be Marba? Not machvas, it says it by machvas. I don't need a reboy for that. Not marcheshes, I know that from the Gzeir Shava, Karbonecha. So what else is it coming to be Mamar? It's coming to be Marba, the Minchas Mafei Taner. Which is, by the way, why, even though the Mishnah said, Kol HaMenachos HaNasis Bekli, Tunois Psisa, and in the previous Gemara we saw that the Minchas Mafei was not considered a Mincha Nasis Bekli, because it was prepared in a Taner, and the Taner was considered Choil. But at the same time, it's Nisraba from the extra word Mincha. Tain is the Gemara, if the word Mincha is being Marba, the Minchas Mafei, even though it wasn't Nasis Bekli, even though I don't have the Gzeir Shava, Machvas, Marcheshes, maybe it should be Marba, the Shtei Alechem, Lechem upon him as well. For that, I have Oisa. So I have a Riba and a Miyut. The Riba is for the Minchas Mafei, the Miyut is for the Shtei Alechem, Lechem upon him. The Pasuk also says, V'yatzakta oleo shamen minchahi. V'yatzakta oleo shemen on the Minchas Machvas. Then it says Mincha, the rabbis call him Menachos liyitzika. That this mitzvah v'yatzakta is not only true for the Machvas, but it's true for all Menachos as well. Yochel, I would think, Shani Marba Minchas Mafei. I would think maybe be Marba Minchas Mafei as well. Just like we were Marba Minchas Mafei regarding the mitzvah of Pesisa. maybe be marba the minchas mafe regarding the mitzvah of yitzika as well. Talmud loy mar oleho shemen oitzias achalois v'loy oitzias arikikin. Maybe just be memayit the minchas mafe chalois, not the minchas mafe rikikin. Talmud loy mar he. That's why the pasuk says here. So meaning it's the same pasuk that teaches me that the minchas mafe has pesisa, teaches me that the minchas mafe does not have yitzika. The minchas mafe has pesisa, pasis oisa pitim. V'yitzakta oleh Hashem and mincha. The word mincha is a riboy in the mitzvah of pesisa. What's it coming to be marba? The minchas mafe. That's why when the Mishnah says kol menachos and nasas bekli tuna is pesisa, we're not memayit the minchas mafe. The minchas mafe is included, but at the same time the pasuk is also talking about another mitzvah by the mincha, the mitzvah of yitzika, and there it says v'yitzakta oleh, and v'yitzakta oleh is a miyut, and it's memayit. It's memayit the minchas mafe, and that's why when the Mishnah said, the first Mishnah, kol menachos and nasas bekli to una shalish matnei shemen. What was it memayit the minchas mafe? Because the minchas mafe did not have 3 matanos; it only had 2 matanos. Which matana didn't it have? The yitzika. Why doesn't it have the yitzika? Now you know the rest of the story. It's based on this limud. The yitzakta oleo shemen oleo dafka on the machvas and the marcheshes. I know through the gzeir shava, but as far as the minchas mafe, it's going to be excluded. Now the pasuk gets. The Brisa said that not only are we memayit the minchas mafe when it's prepared chales, but we memayit the minchas mafe when it's prepared rikikin as well. So the Gemara asks an interesting question. My Talmudo, if I have a pasuk here that's coming to memayit a mincha from yitzika, maybe the one we should be memayit is minchas koyanim. We saw in yesterday's that the minchas koyanim was very different than the other menachos. Right, the minchas koyanim was kolol. And it was prepared very differently. So maybe that's the mincha we might. We said there's not just one miyut in the pasuk, there's 2 miyutim. It says oleh and it says he. 2 miyutim. Which mincha needs 2 miyutim? Minchas kayanim doesn't need 2 miyutim. It's one mincha. It's a minchas kayanim. Which mincha needs 2 miyutim? The minchas mafetana, because it comes in 2 forms. It could come chalas, it could come rakikim. So if the Torah is telling me 2 miyutim, oh, must be we're talking about the mafitana, because only the mafitana would need 2 miyutim. The minchas koyanim, if there ever be a havamina, that it should need 2 miyutim. So the Mishnah writes, how exactly was the pesisa done? So we've heard so much about pesisa. How did it go? So when you conceptualize it, I think very often the picture that comes to mind is they crushed it. And there is one mandam in the Gemara that says that that's exactly what they did. That they would literally they would literally crush it, grind it again, do teichin with it until it got to this. But that's not the pashup shot. So the Mishnah, Minchas Yisrael. If it was a Minchas Yisrael, how was the pesisa done? They would take the mincha, they would fold it into 2. V'shnayim l'arba, then they would fold it into 4. Umavdil, and then they would cut it. So it wasn't just one big thing folded into 4, but they would make it into 4 pieces. Minchas kayanim. If it was a Minchas kayanim, koifel echad l'shnayim, v'shnayim l'arba, the enay mavdil, and it wasn't separated. Minchas koyim Mashiach, the minchas chavit, and that was brought every day by the kohen gadol. They didn't fold it at all. Shimon says minchas koyim and minchas koyim Mashiach ein ben pesisa, mipnei she'ein ben kemitza, v'chol she'ein ben kemitza ein ben pesisa, v'kulon poisim gezayis. Shimon said, number 1, the minchas koyim Mashiach, I believe didn't have pesisa at all. And finally, the Mishnah concludes with another halacha that the pesisa had to be at least a gezayis. So it wasn't soilus, right? It wasn't mefarcha nachem machzirin l'soilus. It's just the opposite. It had to be a chashav shir. It had to be a gezayis. If you remember, this is one of the reasons that kemitza was so difficult. Because if you're doing kemitza with a machvas or a marcheshes or a mafetaner that was prepared first, then they did the psisa, then you did the kemitza. So we know the kaimetz had to be perfect. It couldn't be chaser, it couldn't be yaser. And each piece had to be at least a kazayas. So exactly how you're going to get that inside your kaimetz is very difficult. That's why it was the avodah kasher shev mikdash. Either way, zaktu martanu rabbanon pasos oisa pitim. That's the pasuk. From the word pasos yachal l'shnayim, I would think, all right, cut it into 2. Talmud leimer pitim. I pitim yachal yasen pirur. Maybe pitim's mashma many pieces. Just keep on folding it and breaking it and folding it and breaking it until Talmud leimer oisa lepsisim. That loy pesisa lepesisim. So number 1, pasos, fold it into 2. Pasos oisa, what you folded into 2, make ptis, but that's it. Once you made what you folded into psisim, you're not making psisim anymore. Kate said, Minchas Yisrael, koifel echel l'shnayim v'shnayim l'arbo mavdil, you divide it. Minchas koyanim, the koyim Mashiach, haya me kafla. The Minchas koyanim, the koyim Mashiach, that they folded, but they didn't break. But the Gemara says, Minchas koyim Mashiach, the Brisa says, the Minchas koyim Mashiach, they folded in the same way they folded the minchas koyanim. Aiva Nantran, the Mishnah said lo yehoyu mekafla, that they didn't fold the minchas koyin Mashiach at all. Amar Rabba ein mekafla arba, mekafla shayim. When the Mishnah says that they didn't fold the minchas koyin Mashiach, Minchas koyim Mashiach lahayim mekafla doesn't mean they didn't fold it at all. What it means is they didn't make it into 4, but they did fold it, they made it into 2. That's what the Bryce is. Minchas koyim Mashiach ain't behem pesis. Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef said, "Hay chavitza." This Gemara, if it sounds familiar, is also a Gemara Masechtes Brachos Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis. So there's a dish that's called chavitza. And Chalekes, we showed him exactly what chavitza was, but what we need for our sugya is it was a dish that was cooked. It wasn't baked, it was cooked, and they would take bread. This is bread that was baked, and they would put it now and cook it together with this tafshel. So essentially you're going to have cooked bread. So hay chavitza, the isbei purun kezayis. If the pieces of bread are the shir of a kezayis, mevarchinon aleh hamoitzi lachem in aretz. Then the birchas hanenin that you're supposed to make, the bracha shel lefaneh, is hamoitzi. Eat less by purun kezayis. If however the pieces are not the shir of a kezayis, mevarchinon aleh bayre mine mezainis. Then the bracha you make is a bayre mine mezainis. So clearly the ikar in this tafshel was considered the grain. It was the bread. The question is, being that there's bread in here, is it mechayev hamoitzi or is it mechayev mezainis? The bread is always hamoitzi. But over here it was baked, it was cooked. So being that it was cooked after it was baked, but now it's cooked, so maybe the bracha changes. So what's the halacha? So Rav Yosef said, I'm going to tell you how this works. If the pieces of bread are a kezayis, you make hamoitzi lachem in haaretz. If the pieces of bread are less than a kezayis, then you make a bar min mezayis. I'm Rav Yosef, no, Amin Allah. Tanya, I know this from Mesechtes Menachos, a brayso. There was a kohen who was bringing Menachos Mishalayim. Oimer, he makes the bracha. Which bracha? Shechiyanu v'kimanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh. Obviously, we're talking about a kohen that hasn't brought a carbon mincha in a little while. So it's the first time this year he's doing it. So not every time you bring a carbon mincha do you make a shachiyanu. So it's his first time doing it, or first time Yud Beis Chaydish, he makes the bracha shachiyanu v'kimanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh. Not on la'achlam. If he wants to now eat the mincha, he makes another bracha. He says hamoitzi lechem min haaretz. So what bracha do you make on a mincha? You make hamoitzi. But now we learned in the Mishnah that we just learned, the Kulon, Psisa B'Kezayis, that these Menachos had to have Pesisa, and the Pesisa had to be a Kezayis. And what bracha is he making? He's making hamoitzi, and the menachos, the machvas, the marcheshes, they were fried. They weren't baked, they were fried. So you see here that cooked bread, that's a kezayis, you make hamoitzi lachem in ours. Now at first glance, Rabbi Yosef is only bringing a raya to the first half of what he said. Rabbi Yosef said two things. Rabbi Yosef said, hay chavitza, that has cooked bread, if it's a kezayis, you make hamoitzi. If it's less than a kezayis, you make a mezainis. Pashit, Rabbi Yosef is bringing a raya to the first thing that he said, stating that, I am b'rishonim beharchava. But Abaya told Rabbi Yosef, there is another shita. Meaning, it's true in our Mishnah, the Tana holds that Psisa had to be at least a Kezayas. But there's also Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel, who said, Mefarchan, Ad Shemachzir l'Silas. They used to literally make it until it was Silas again. So according to Rabbi Shmuel, Abaya told Rabbi Yosef, Hochinami, Dulay Mevarach HaMaitzi? Are you going to tell me you shouldn't make HaMaitzi? Because then it's a chavitza that's Pachas mikazayis, and you're telling me a chavitza that's pachas mikazayis, you make a mezayis. Fichitei machinami. Yeah, who said not? But Heinrich learned in a brayso. He says, but I'll bring you a raya from a brayso that you're wrong. Because liket mikulan kazayis, the brayso is talking about where somebody had little pieces of bread. I think the bread over there was chulin. We're not even talking about bread that was a mincha. Bread that was chulin. And he was melakate these breads. V'achloi, and he ate it. He ate a kazayis. Im chametzu. On his cars. If he did this on Pesach, and it was chametz, kares. Im matzahu, if he did it on Pesach and it was matzah, you could be yotzei dechavasa bePesach. You could be mekayim your mitzvah of be'erev toichlu matzah. Now, if you could be mekayim the mitzvah of matzah, zok Rashi, that means that it's hamoitzi lachem in haaretz. It must be that it's bread. And you see over here that you're being liket mikulan kazayis. So what does that by definition mean? It means that each piece is less than a kezayis. So Abaya said, I have a raya al kopanim from this brayso that even on a pachas mikazayis, you still make amaitzi. So the Gemara says, Rav Yosef told Abaya, we're talking about it's true, each piece he was malaket mikulam pachas mikazayis, but then he added something to it, and he turned it into one piece, and that's when he ate it. The point is that by the time that he was eating it, it was already one piece. That's why you could be yotzei chayvas matzah. And you're right, in that case, you would have to make hamoitzi lachem in haaretz. But the Gemara says, Ihachi hainu diktani alava hu sha'achlan b'ktei achilas pras. The Bryce over there continues. It says you have to eat all of it b'ktei achilas pras. What's the kasha? V'ibe she'irsan. If right now it's one piece, sha'achloi mi bayalei. Why say sha'achlan? Sha'achlan's a lashon rabbin. It's a diak. It should have said sha'achloi. Elamai, it's mashma it's mashma that it's many pieces, and still you see it could be Yaitza Matzah. So Abai is asking a kasha of Yosef from this brayso. The Gemara says, Allah my skin, or Yosef said, this is a whole different case. So there was a big piece of bread, and now from this bread there were little pieces that came off. You were malaki the little pieces, and you made a kazayis. So although it's true, each piece that you have now is pachas mekazayis, but being that it comes from a lechem gadol, and the lechem gadol is still intact, it's for that reason that in this case you're going to make the hamaitzi. Ordinarily, if it was pachas mekazayis, you wouldn't make the hamaitzi. But here, being that it's from a lechem gadol, you would make hamaitzi. My havi Allah. What's the bottom line? Rav Sheish Asam Afilu Perurim She'em Ben Kazayis. Even Perurim She'em Ben Kazayis, still you make hamaitzi lechem in the arts. My Rava who the iku turisa in a hamalai, but it's only if it has a tzuras hapas. If it doesn't have a tzuras hapas, in that case you're not going to have halach. So we went through this Gemara quickly. There's really a lot here. Just pasha pshat cheshbon, the kashans and the terutzim of the Gemara. We're leaving a lot on the table. So I am b'rishonim. Incidentally, just one real life hechatimtza where the poskim discuss where you have bread that's being cooked or fried, and now each piece could be pachis mekazayis. You'd have a shayla. Do you make a hamoitzi? Do you make a mezainis? And that's matzah brai. So a lot of people eat matzah brai in Pesach. But matzah brai, you're taking matzah, which is hamoitzi lachem min haaretz, and now you're breaking it into pieces. Each piece is pachas mikazayis, right? You know what a kazayis matzah looks like. So you know it's pachas mikazayis. So you have these little pieces and you're frying them. So the question is right now, do you make hamoitzi on matzah brai, or do you make a mezainis on matzah brai? So some say that maybe there's a chilik between the minig of the Ashkenazim and the Sfardim. Right? The Ashkenazim make hamoitzi on matzah the whole year. The Sfardim make hamoitzi on matzah only on Pesach, but the rest of the year they make a bar minim mezainis. And the truth is, and we're not learning Periketz and Mavarchim now, but if you go through the sugyas, really, you should make a mezainis on matzah. The reason we make moitzi on matzah, those that do, is because being that on Pesach, matzah is the Meichel Choshev, and everybody holds that for the Meichel Choshev, you have to make a moitzi because there is no bread on Pesach. Thus, it becomes the Meichel, gives it a chashivas to make a moitzi. So once on Pesach it's a moitzi, so the whole year it becomes a moitzi. The minig asfardim is not that way. No, on Pesach it's hamoitzi, because on Pesach it's the Meichel Choshev. The rest of the year it's not. So it could be there's a nafkamina. If matzah is be'etzem hamoitzi, or matzah is really a mezainis, it's just because you're eating matzah, so now you're going to go ahead and make a hamoitzi. But maybe in the case of matzah bride, it would be a little bit different. There's different minhagim, but the bottom line is just one real life application as far as this goes. But just to end today's daf with one ha'ara, and that is the Gemara discussed. There's a kohen who was bringing a mincha of Yerushalayim. What bracha does he make? He makes a shechiyanu v'kimanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh. He sits down now to eat the karban mincha. Daf nachanacha bracha. Which bracha does he make? He makes hamoitzi lechem in haaretz. I saw Reb Meshulam David Halevi, so sein gesund, Reb David Soloveitchik, in a shiurim in the Sechtes Vachim. So we spoke out part of the shir Shavuos night. So Reb David has a whole shir on the brachos that the Kehanim made when they ate kachim. And Reb David in that shir asked the Gavaldige Kasha, you only make birchas hanenim when you sit down to eat the mincha? What happened to the birchas hamitzvahs? Achilas kachim is a mitzvah. V'achlu oisam asher kupar behem. Of course it's a mitzvah. And the Gemara says, in the end of Arvei Psachim, that when you sit down to eat the karban Pesach, you had to make two brachas. You had to make the brichas hanenim, and then there was a brichas hamitzvahs as well, because you'd be mekayim the mitzvah of achilas Pesach. And that's Pasha. It said Rab David that it's not only true for mitzvahs for Pesach, it's true for all the karbanos. There's a whole shit, the nusach bracha with Rambams flying back and forth. But the bottom line is, of course he made a brichas hamitzvahs. So the Brisa addresses which is only Lu Yitzuyur, he hasn't brought a mincha in a little while. We talk about the Hamoitzi Lechem in Haaretz. What happened to the Berachas HaMitzvahs? Shouldn't you have to make a bracha al achilas kachim or al achilas menachos? Exactly what the nusach bracha is going to be. But shouldn't you have to make a bracha? He blind sarchin, Reb David. It's not sure. He doesn't know Pashup Shan in the Brisa. But that is clear. There was definitely a Berachas HaMitzvahs. You have to know why it's not mentioned. It's just two ha'aras regarding the Berachas HaMitzvahs. Number one, just a nice Maramakim, the Mishul Melech speaks out, the Chinuch brings this Mishul Melech in Kuf Lamed Aleph, but the Mishul Melech speaks out that any time a Kohen would sit down to eat the Mincha, that's what he's discussing in Kuf Lamed Aleph, but really all Achilas Kachim that only a Kohen was allowed to eat, so what was the Nusach HaBracha? Asher Kidishanu b'Misvaysa v'Tzivanu al Achilas Kachim, or al Achilas Menach? He says no. It was Asher Kidishanu b'Kdushasei shel HaHaron, V'tzivanu al achilas kachim. He says we know that the kohen when he duchens, so he says Asher kedishanu b'kedushasei shel haharon. So Dr. Mishul Melech, it wasn't only when he duchen. Every single time a kohen did a mitzvah that was totally in kedushas haharon, he would preface it with that nusach. So if he sat down to eat the mincha, he would make the bracha Sheker Dishanu B'Kedushasei Shel Aharon V'Tzivanu Al Achilas Menachos or Al Achilas Kachim. Again, exactly what the Nusach HaBracha would be. One other ha'ara he speaks out very nicely is that we've spoken at Raid many times regarding Achilas Kachim, that the mitzvah of Achilas Kachim is fundamentally different than an ordinary mitzvahs Achila. And really, just the background to the Raid, not to go through the whole Arichos again, but it's kedai to mention the Gemara again, Yuma Daf Lamed Tes Amud Aleph. The Gemara over there is discussing the difference between the 40 years that Shimon HaTzadik reigned as Kohen Gadol, in the beginning of Ayasheni, versus what took place after Shimon HaTzadik passed away, and Shimon HaTzadik was no longer the Kohen Gadol. So Shimon HaTzadik was Shimon HaTzadik. Shmoi Hoylech Lefanov. But after Shimon HaTzadik passed away, the Gemara, we're going to learn it soon, at the end of Masechtas Menachos, it's an impossible Gemara to learn. But we're going to learn, the Gemara tells the story about Shimon HaTzadik's sons that took over his kahuna, and you see the spiritual situation devolved very quickly. Immediately after Shimon HaTzadik passed away, there was a phenomenal Yeridas Hadairis. But the bottom line is, the Gemara says that it played itself out. It was very much manifest in the Beis HaMikdash. And the Gemara goes on to describe that Shimon HaTzadik was Kohen Gadol, the Goyrel on Yom Kippur was always Oil Yamin. The Lashon Shal Zahiris always turned white. The Ner Maravi was Doileg. The Eshal Maracha was Miskaber B'chol Yoyim. The Kohanim didn't even have to add eitzim to the Maracha. They were Makayim the mitzvah of the Shnei Gziri eitzim. Other than that, they didn't have to do anything, etc., etc. Then there was always bracha in the karbanos. So there was bracha in the Omer, there was bracha in the Shtei HaLechem, there was bracha in the Lechem HaPanim. When the Kohanim would go to divide the mincha, we had earlier in the week, you're not allowed to trade minchas. But when they sat down to everybody got a good share. Everyone had a shir chashav. They could feel good about it. There was so much bracha in the matnas kahuna. Mikan ve'elach, after Shimon HaTzadik passed away, nishtalcha me'era ba'omer ub'shtei halechem u'b'lechem haponim. The chol kohen, when the kohanim divided the lechem haponim, each kohen would get kapul. He would get even less than a kazayas. And as a result, the tznuim, the shiny yidin, moishchenes yidayim, they would say, you know what, it's fine, it's such a small share, I don't need it. V'agargeronim, the fresses, noitlim, va'oichlin, they would go ahead, and the Gemara goes on to describe again different stories and what went on after Shimon HaTzadik passed away. But the bottom line is that after Shimon HaTzadik passed away, when they would divide the Menachos, the Omer, the Shtei HaLechem, and the Lechem HaPanim, these are our sugyas. When they would divide the Menachos, there was so little for each person to get. Each person got kapul. And as a result, it's new and said, that's fine, I'm not going to fight over it. I don't need it. It's Yedua. The Velt asks a kasha, Mishlo Melech, Klez Chakira. We know that Chatzi Shir is also in HaTorah. Even though when it says in the Torah, you're not allowed to eat nevela, it means you're not allowed to eat a gazayis in a veila. Stating that, Rabbi Yochanan Shita is that that's only with regards to the oynish of Malchus, or all oinshin in the Torah. But as it relates to the Isser, Chatzish is also in the Torah. Kazayis is a halach in Hilchas Shiurim. But as it relates to Isser the Heter, Chatzish is also in the Torah. Mishlomelech declared, what would be regarding mitzvahs? Is there an idea to do a Chatzish of mitzvah? So it's Pesach night and you don't have a Kazayis matzah. You don't have a Kazayis matzah. Is there an idea to eat a half a Kazayis? Chatzi shir. By Loisa says you have Chatzi shir also in Torah. What about by a mitzvah? Do you have a Chatzi shir as well? Time is the time of the Achronim, the Chasam Sofer, Tzviar Shchayis, and the Beis Levi, all the Gedolei Achronim. This Gemara. It's a Mefurish Gemara. Because the Gemara says that when they divided the Lechem HaPanim and they divided the Shtei HaLechem and the Omer, there was less than a Kazayas for each Kohen. So what did the Kohanim do? They said, that's no Moish Chanesidei, we're not going to eat it. Pashup Shat, because they didn't have a Kazayas. They didn't have a Kazayas, they weren't going to be able to Mekayim the mitzvah. But if there's Chatzi Shir b'mitzvahs, it's true they couldn't be Mekayim the real mitzvah. But what about the Chatzi Shir mitzvah? That's why is that a frumkeit? It's a nice tznius, but you're walking away from a mitzvah. So you'll tell me because there was no kazayas. But what happened to Chatzi Shir? If there's Chatzi Shir b'mitzvahs, then aren't they being mekayim the mitzvah of Chatzi Shir by eating it? So why would the tznuim? That's the Velt's kasha. Zog and the Achronim, they all say it. Everybody in their own nusach. But all the Achronim say that Vaisleis from here. It's choluk b'yesay the mitzvah achilas kachim from shar achilas. Ordinarily, the mitzvah is a mitzvah. Let's say it Londish. That's chal ar karkafta de gavra. There's a mitzvah for me, Leo Pesach, to eat matzah. How much? A gazai. That's my mitzvah. The mitzvah is for me to eat a gazai. Achilas kachim. There was no mitzvah on the kohen to eat the kachim. The mitzvah was chal on the chefza. The mitzvah was chal on the kachim that it has to be nechal. It's a little bit of a hard lumdus. But the mitzvah wasn't go eat. The mitzvah is to make sure that it's eaten. And as a result, if I'm a kohen and I'm in charge today, because it's my mishmar, it's my beisav, and this kachim in front of me, I don't necessarily have a mitzvah to eat it as much as I have a mitzvah to make sure it's eaten. So if you're going to eat it and you're also a kohen, so I can be mekayim the mitzvah by you eating it. We'll be mekayim the mitzvah together by making sure that it's eaten. But there's no mitzvah to eat. If the mitzvah is to go eat, then each person is only mekayim the mitzvah if he actually eats. If the mitzvah is for it to be nechal, then it doesn't really matter exactly how it's going to be eaten. Bottom line is, says the Beis Halevi and the Chassam Sofer and the Avnei Nezer and all the Gedolei Achronim say this Yesod, that Vaisai says, well, that's why it's true. Ordinarily, there's an Indian of Chatzi Shir. So of course, maybe if it's Pesach night and all you have is a Chatzi Zayas Matzah, the Mishul Melech on one side of his Chak Pir is Gerech. Maybe there would be an idea to eat a half a Zayas. But by Achilas Kashim, there was no point in eating it. Why? Because it was anyways going to be eaten. People were chapping it. The Gargaronim were taking care of it. They were going to make sure that it was going to be eaten. Being that they were going to make sure it was going to be eaten, there was no Indian. The point is that when it comes to Achilas Kachim, just to look at it from another angle, there's no difference really between eating it kazayas, eating less than a kazayas, and not eating at all. What matters is that it should be eaten. So ordinarily, when you talk about Achilas, there's kazayas, there's pachas mikazayas. But when it comes to Achilas Kachim, even if you're going to eat, you could eat less than a kazayas, or it's all the same. So machnish kein chiluk. Why not? Because at the end of the day, the mitzvah is to make sure it's nechal. Clear? Zok Rav David, a gewaldige ha'ara. He says, but yesh loymar, that's only true with regards to the mitzvah of achilas kachim. But as it relates to the bracha, asher kedishanu b'kedushasei shel haharon, v'tzivanu al achilas shiori menachos, or whatever the nusach habracha is going to be. When it comes to that, says Rav David, then already it's going to be different. Then you're going to need a kazayas. And Rav David invokes the famous Rosh, the Rosh in Perek Arba Psachim. The Rosh is discussing Morer, and the Rosh says that Morer has to be b'kazayas. And why? So Pashto you'd say, I don't know, you have to, it's Achila. Achila has to be kazayas. And the Rosh says, V'kama kumus in the Shtabru, and many Shabbos HaGadol drushes were said on this Rosh, and there's a lot of raid that's been said on this Rosh. But Zokta Rosh, the reason is it's an Arba Psachim, it's Simin Chafeh, Mishum de Mevarich al Achilas Morer. Being that the Chazal said that you have to make a bracha when you eat Morer, Ashekti Yishara b'mitzvayis v'tzivat, Alachilas Morer. It's for that reason that Sarach sheyoichal kazayas. It's for that reason you have to eat a kazayas. The ein achila b'pachas mikazayas. Because alachilas Morer means that you're eating a shir chashuv. And the nusach habracha is what's mechayev the kazayas. Be'etzem mitzad the kiyum mitzvah says the Rosh, you wouldn't have to eat a kazayas tomorrow. You have to eat a kazayas. That's a famous word for Reb Chaim on this Rosh. But you wouldn't have to eat a kazayas. You know why you have to eat a kazayas? Because you're making a bracha. You're saying alachilas Morer. Alachilas Morer is mechayev a kazayas. It says Reb David that the Zayd of the Beis Halevi is gerecht. He was mechiach from the Gemara in Yuma Daf Lametes that when it comes to achilas kachim, you don't even have to eat it. And if you're going to eat it, you could eat pachas mikazayas. You could be mekayim this as long as it's nechal. You mekayim the mitzvah of achilas kachim, even with an achila of pachas mikazayas. It's not a chatzi shir. There's no shir. There's no idea of eating a kazayas or less than a kazayas. But that's only if you don't want to make the bracha. But if you're going to make the bracha, shekidishanu b'kedushasu shalaharon al achilas shiori menachos or al achilas chatos, now already you're going to have to eat a kazayas because you can't make an al achilas unless you eat a kazayas. Just like the Rosh said, the Morer really doesn't eat a kazayas. But being that you're going to make a bracha and you're going to say al achilas Morer, so the bracha is mechayev the kazayas, so too the birchas ha-mitzvahs of the achilas kachim, that will be mechayev the kazayas. A beautiful ha'ara from Rav David.